So what is your plan?
Kill the god of the desert. You must kill the desert itself.
Kill the desert? How do you kill the desert?
Over the last couple of years that this Anatomy of Failure series has been going on, we've come across quite a few not-so-great movies of varying levels. We've had unfortunate letdowns that could have used some specific improving. We've had bigger stinkers that stumbled very badly in a certain area of movie making. But now, it appears we have come to face our ultimate contender thus far, Gods of Egypt. In short, Gods of Egypt was a big-budget franchise-starting wannabe summer blockbuster dumped in theaters in February of 2016, and the result is exactly what you might expect. Nobody liked it except the blind deaf community. Nobody went to see it except the blind deaf community who thought they were seeing Deadpool again. And it lost a bunch of money in the process. You've heard this story a million times. But the thing that makes Gods of Egypt a very special standout case is the fact that it is in definite contention for the worst movie I've ever seen. And it might very well be the worst movie ever covered on this channel. Because whereas usually the point here is to focus on the few major aspects that made a movie fail, Gods of Egypt just waltzes in and aces the entire failure chart. Without exaggerating, it might be the crappiest big-budget Hollywood studio movie to date. And the reason I say a Hollywood studio movie is because that's who I believe made Gods of Egypt. Apparently it has some credited writers, but I seriously doubt any writer actually wrote the movie that was released. More than anything, this thing seems to be the handiwork of a group of clueless, incompetent producers and studio executives. See, you know how in other movies you might see certain sections of weird, unfitting moments and story choices where you know the studio came in to reshoot stuff? Well, that's all this movie is from beginning to end. Every dumb, harmful thing these over-controlling studio executives always do, you'll find in here. Like, all joking and exaggeration aside, Gods of Egypt is like the ultimate how-to guide to making a trash, mind-numbingly boring blockbuster movie that is destined for nothing but failure. In other words, a wealth of useful information. So let's use it. Let's run through this entire movie from the first act to the third act and briefly touch on every bigger dumb studio choice made in it, as well as the negative effects that they carry. Let's see what Gods of Egypt does so that we know what not to do. Here's a definitive how-to guide to making the ultimate trash Hollywood studio movie. First off, instead of opening your movie with an intriguing, powerful image or situation, Gods of Egypt shows that there is only one proper way to begin these big studio blockbusters.
Before history began, Egypt was the birthplace of all life. The gods were taller, with gold running through their veins instead of blood. Egypt itself was divided between two mighty brothers, man crown and new frightening staking the gods amongst the mortals.
That's right, you want to open with a couple to a few minutes of impersonal exposition voiceover that verbally explains your movie's full world and backstory. Preferably some kind of history lesson, just so that the audience is well and ready to go to sleep before we even get to anything. Secondly, you want to introduce your main heroes. But as we see here, you don't want to do anything special or distinct that would give them a strong, memorable personality to make them stand out. That's way too dangerous. That's for the experimental indie movies. There exists only one type of hero you need to be creating: the lovable rascal. We have our human hero Henry Turner from Pirates 5, who immediately steals a fancy dress. But it's because he wants to give it to his pretty girlfriend. We have our god hero Jaime Lannister, who throws wild, unresponsible parties. But deep down, he's clearly a very kind chap with a big heart. Overall, don't waste time inventing any big major characterizing flaws. Just create a surface level vanilla hero so that the audience doesn't have enough interest to care about them in any way.
Nice.
And also, if your heroes have some kind of major traits and skills that come into play later, don't worry about setting them up visually at this point. You can do that verbally later when we get to them.
Is it true you still never miss? Doesn't that get dull?
Oh my god, he missed, even though it was just said that he never misses. This is clearly a very tough high-stakes situation.
But the thing you do need to do here is give your heroes a love interest to ground them and make them more likable. Cause, you know, oh, he does these things for his girlfriend slash wife slash family. What a nice guy. But again, you don't need to waste time building the love interests up as their own distinct characters. They just need to be objects for the hero to either protect or win over. That's all female characters are good for anyway. All they need is to be really hot and have a gorgeous smile. All the personality they need is on display right there on their chest.
What do you offer?
I have only my smile.
So be it.
Then, as you go on, just in case some audience members survive that voiceover opening without falling asleep, you wanna have more expository on-the-nose dialogue where characters say exactly what they mean in a way the script needs them to,
Father gave it to you. Kept me alive for many a night.
and give out public speeches without any conflict about things that mean absolutely nothing to the audience.
Goddess of protection!
My father has seen fit to bless this day.
God of wisdom!
This is my legacy.
At this point, we should be getting to the inciting incident, like here when our evil villain god Seth shows up to fight his king brother god. And there's a couple ways to make this effective and interesting. You could, for example, keep Seth's full motivation as a mystery and ride on his strong actions alone, or you could have his motivation be based on something we've seen before. But as we see here, the thing you wanna do is have Seth fully explain his motivation in a way that, based on what we've seen before, means absolutely nothing. You know, just so that his entire motivation and the catalyst into the plot immediately come off as forced and empty and dumb.
Why, in 1,000 years of peace, what have you accomplished? A land of people who dream of nothing more. In 1,000 years of peace, what have you accomplished? A land of people who dream of nothing more.
Also, since your blockbuster most likely has a bunch of CGI, you wanna showcase the worst of it right away. Like, even if you have some pretty good CGI later on, you wanna begin with the video game stuff, just so that the audience knows not to take you seriously. Finally, as the inciting incident of Seth crowning himself as king pushes us into the main plot, this movie shows that there is only one proper way to begin our journey.
And so, Set was king. In the year that followed,
Exactly, nothing like a good old one-year time jump in the middle of Act 1. It creates an entirely new status quo norm, it resets all the relationships and momentum we've built up thus far, it gives off an annoying feeling of wasted time because we might as well have begun the movie right here. And of course, again, instead of showing us this new horrible norm, instead of showing slaves being mistreated and dying, instead of showing Seth change access to the afterlife into paid DLC, you already know how to establish that.
many gods stood against him. By our way into the afterlife, Horus withdrew into exile. I had found Zaya enslaved to a cruel master.
Getting into the main plot quest of the second act, the very first thing you need is a MacGuffin, a plot item that dresses the quest up into a more understandable physical form. Here, Henry Turner from Pirates 5 brings Jamie one of his eyes that Seth took from him, and now they need to head out to find the other eye so that Jamie can become strong enough to defeat Seth. Pretty simple, pretty comprehensible. So simple and comprehensible in fact that Gods of Egypt knows to throw in a bunch more unnecessary MacGuffins to overcomplicate things.
Kill the god of the desert. You must kill the desert itself.
Kill the desert!
The whole of the Nile cannot quench Set's fire, but a few drops from the water of creation can.
What about the Sphinx? Have you forgotten about that?
Sphinx!
Set captured it to guard its fire.
We shall ask Toth for help.
What?
That's right, instead of just using Jamie's other eye as the clear destination we're always moving towards, this movie keeps verbally inventing other important items and pit stops. To defeat Seth, we first need to extinguish his fire, which of course has never been shown. But to extinguish the fire, we first need to go get some water of creation, which we had no clue we even needed before we get it. But then apparently there's also a Sphinx, then apparently there's also a guy whose name we don't recognize. The reason tossing in all this extra stuff out of nowhere is so important is because it makes sure that it's never clear where we're going or why, and the entire second act feels like we're making no real progress at all, which is very effective in making the whole experience excruciatingly boring and unrewarding. Overall, you want to treat your audience the same way Mark Wahlberg treats federal officers.
Okay, so is that all of it? Are we now headed to Sphinx car or whatever?
Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe yourself. My theory on
the audience
is they're like mushrooms. Feed them and keep him in the dark.
The other thing you want to confuse is the stakes for why we're doing anything. Here, we need to stop Seth because everyone says he's evil, but the movie doesn't really ever show him doing anything evil that we would have to put a stop to. We do see him make people build stuff because everyone is so desperate for money right now due to the afterlife apparently having been turned into paid DLC, but I'm pretty sure the earlier buildings didn't just appear out of thin air, so why is this such a big deal? We do see him go to war against some other gods, but we don't even know who they are, and the result is confusion as to why exactly do we need to stop him? Why should we care?
Oh no, not my favorite hero, Nephthys, goddess of protection.
Then there's also the motivation to bring back Henry's dead love interest before she reaches the afterlife. But again, we don't really care about her either, and this movie has successfully complicated even the basic concept of death to the point of us being unsure whether death is good or bad.
Thought the afterlife was a gift. From now on, you have to buy your way in with riches earned.
Gold, gold. You'll have plenty enough gold for the afterlife.
So she won't be allowed through the final gate.
Immortality awaits us all in the afterlife.
This will buy you a place in the afterlife.
No. Not without you.
Despite all that, however, there is some positive stuff even in here, namely a couple very cool second act action sequences. There's a pretty visually dope space worm battle, there's this giant snake battle which is really amazing. So to make sure that even these don't work, the movie separates them from everything else in a way that they don't advance the plot and could have been cut out altogether. The space worm fight has nothing to do with our quest in any way and instead just makes our quest seem insignificant. The snake fight takes place at this ruined temple that serves no purpose in the plot, which just makes us wonder why we're hanging out here getting exposition about the temple in the first place. Just in general, be sure to throw in every cool idea you have regardless of whether it actually connects to anything or not and ends up being just a waste of time. Then there's also a couple smaller things. When you film fight scenes, you want to parody the original Matrix because that really is a sign of originality and quality. When you have characters reveal new powers, you want those powers to shift in strength so drastically that it breaks the whole movie.
I can make any man, woman, god or beast do my bidding, unless their heart belongs to another.
Okay then, why didn't you just do that to Seth to stop him? We saw him kill his ex-wife, so I'm pretty sure his heart is on the market now. Or you could just use it on the Sphinx so that we wouldn't have to be going on this pointless side trip in the first place.
Finally, once we actually get to Seth's fire pit, Seth himself shows up and defeats our heroes, because that's what happens at the end of the second act. And instead of having an organic way for our heroes to escape into the third act, the movie just has Seth leave them behind to be killed by his trap instead of finishing them off himself. Because, you know, that's a staple of quality writing.
Aren't you even gonna watch them? They could get away.
No. I'm going to leave them alone and not actually witness them dying. I'm just going to assume it all went to plan. What?
I have a gun in my room. You give me 5 seconds, I'll get it.
Oh, and also, that incredibly important fire pit MacGuffin we spent the entire second act chasing. Yeah, it never gets resolved in any way and apparently wasn't ever necessary. And that's essentially what you want your second act to do, waste the audience's time. Going into the third act, the first big thing you want to do is something very different from everything else. For the very first time, show the audience a glimpse of something genuinely very good.
Father.
I noticed the tower. Impressive.
I built it for you.
If it were any taller, it would be in my way.
When we see Seth being disregarded by his cold, uncaring dad like he always has been, that finally effectively makes his motivation clear to us. He's causing all this death and destruction just because he wants his dad to see him. That's three-dimensional. That's fantastic. Of course, at this point it's way too f***ing late, but the reason you show this is to piss the audience off, because now they realize that there exists a much better version of this movie somewhere, and thus a worldwide Twitter movement criticizing your actions is born. After that, it's right back to trash, because now you want to set up the high-stakes threat for the third act, and obviously it has to be a massive, impersonal, vague, world-threatening CGI dumpster fire that follows no established logic whatsoever.
Seth has Ra's spear. He's drawing Apophis to the Nile, to the source of all life.
Why?
To drink it.
In a nutshell, Seth for some reason wants to live forever, and the way he sets out to do this is by destroying the afterlife and killing death, and so he hires the space worm to do that for him. And look, I know what you're thinking. How exactly does the space worm drinking up the Nile destroy the afterlife and death? Why is the space worm here to begin with when it would have been much simpler to just have Seth use his dad's weapon to challenge death himself? Why are we even suddenly waging war against death at all when it has played no part in anything we've done before? None of these questions matter. All that matters is that we now have a massive CGI space worm eating the Earth in the background. We might not ever actually fight it, and it might as well not be there, but it is there. And that's what makes this third act so Hollywood and so great.
I can understand killing for a crown, but this is madness.
Of course you don't understand. How could you?
After that, once you've had your mandatory PlayStation 2 level CGI fight scenes, you then arrive at the spot where you have to make your hero make an ultimate choice to show that he has changed. Like Jamie now having to choose between his other eye and Henry Turner from Pirates 5.
My journey isn't to seek revenge at all costs. It is to protect my people.
When Jamie saves Henry and due to that transforms into his god form again, even though it was established that he can only transform if he has both eyes, that shows the audience that he has changed and completed his arc of learning to protect his people. And you might call this dumb and phony because Jamie was never established to have a flaw of not protecting his people in the first place, and instead he actually always seemed pretty nice unless you continuously annoy him, but again, that stuff doesn't matter. This moment of change has to be here, so as long as it's there, we're all good. It doesn't have to be real change. Illusion of change is more than enough. The audience is a bunch of idiots anyway. Then of course you have your standard good ending where everything is great and everyone is smiling, and where you inadvertently add in a couple more things that make no sense and spit in the face of the journey we just went on. Like Jamie saying that he somehow switched access to the afterlife from paid DLC back to it being earned through good deeds, even though it's been established that gods don't control death or the afterlife. Or like Jamie having his people build up his broken statues, even though that was the very reason we needed to stop Seth in the first place. And there you go, a true Hollywood studio movie. Looks pretty great to me.